email me through there.
Okay. Hi, this is Jeff from Trauma Type. I am joined by Jeff from Gen X Jeff. Jeff is an ENTP. He has autism and ADHD. He's also a peer counselor, and he has his own live stream where he discusses masculinity and a lot of other things. Jeff, do you want to add anything that I missed?
I guess that's about it. You say autism, ADHD. I also have giftedness, and back when I was being tested, they weren't testing for specific things like ADHD and autism, so it showed up as giftedness. So I just call it neurodivergent because I have like a mix of several of the categories.
Okay. I had an INTJ on here. You're actually talking to her in the chat with when I was interviewing Kim, the ENFP. Her name is Elodie. She's French and she's ADHD, autism, and gifted too. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, cool. Two E is the educational term for it. Twice exceptional.
Oh,
It's
okay.
two
I didn't know what
exceptions from the norm.
two exceptions. Okay, I was wondering what 2E meant, like second edition D&D or something. I don't know.
Yeah. There's that too. Yeah.
All right, you can contact them at Twitter at Primal Heat or Primal Hex and Gen X Jeff. I'll put the descriptions down below if you want to give them the email address because you said you didn't want to put it in print
Yeah,
form.
it's the same. My YouTube name is also Primal Hex, PRIMALHEX, and it's also primalhex at gmail.com. So Twitter, YouTube, and Gmail. You should all be able to reach me under Primal Hex.
Very cool. He also has a Discord server for men's mental health. You want to tell everyone about that?
I do. I have a Discord server for men's mental health, and we also meet every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. We have a Zoom group. So if you're a man or male, you're welcome to join us there. We're looking for men from all different backgrounds and perspectives. I also have another Discord server for 2E, twice exceptional people. So if you're gifted or neurodivergent or think you might be gifted, and you can join us there too. And you can contact me at any of those sites I named for an invitation to either server.
Okay, very cool. Let's talk about your YouTube channel, Gen X Jeff, a little bit. What is that all about? What's your inspiration for that?
Well, my inspiration is actually I've been watching some of the live streamers and kind of got inspired. So during COVID, I started a podcast with some friends, and it was called New World Chaos, and I have that attached to my current channel. But that was more of a team. There were several of us that hosted it. We had different guests on, and so I never got a chance to kind of be just me talking into a camera like solo. And so I watched some live streamers, and there's this one girl that does art, so she draws while she live streams. And when I saw that, I'm like, I could probably do something like that. Instead of talking to a camera, I don't draw, but I could find something to do. So I started working on a jigsaw puzzle, and I put the jigsaw together while I talk and give my thoughts on different topics. I pull up Twitter and see what tweets are happening that day. And I'm still kind of evolving my process. So what it's starting to turn into is taking different topics. Like I did community building a few for the last few episodes. I did giftedness yesterday. I did masculinity one day, and kind of going through my personal life and drawing on my personal experience with those topics. So sharing some concrete instances from my one life to illustrate and expand on those topics. So I think that's kind of the direction it's going in. I'd love to have guests. I'd love to have commenters to interact with and have a generate a conversation from the comment section that could spill over into the live stream. I had a guest last weekend, a guy from Norway. We talked for 2.5 hours about the educational system in Norway and the political structure and the differences from that in the US. So that was interesting. I love having guests. I'm really good at dialogue and conversation. The monologuing is new to me. So right now it's mostly me talking for an hour into the camera. I try to do an hour a day. So I talk for an hour a day into the camera. But I want to have a mix of that and other guests to come on as well.
Very cool. I definitely can't talk by myself. I have to have someone to bounce off with. I'm not a very big conversationalist, and I host a podcast, so we got a
I didn't think I
guest.
could do it either. You might surprise yourself.
I mean, I try to film like videos like on typology and stuff, and I'm just like stumbling over my words and stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Hey Jeff, I'm here to watch a bit before work. I'm not sure which Jeff you're talking to. I'm assuming both of us for Cheryl Graham.
Oh, that's my friend Cheryl. Yeah, she's part of my 2E group. So,
Oh, okay,
hey,
cool.
Cheryl.
Hello, Cheryl. Thank you for joining us. If anyone in the audience has any questions as we go, feel free to chime in. Like my audience is kind of hit or miss. Like I had a pretty good turnout for Kim, but we'll see this one.
Yeah, I really liked Kim's interview. The
Yeah,
stuff
just
she was saying about, I used to teach special ed, and the stuff she was saying about how to work with that population was like, this girl knows what she's talking about.
yeah. I used to be like a teacher's aide. They called it therapeutic support staff for kids with like autism and behavioral health issues, and
Oh, awesome.
yeah, it was a wild ride.
Yeah, I loved it.
A lot of wrestling kids, that's for sure.
Oh,
All right. So I don't know how much you know about typology, but what's it like being an ENTP for you?
well, I mean, I don't know any different. I'm pretty balanced between my EMI and my TMIF. So there was a time when I kind of felt I leaned more ENFP. Um, but the past several, like as an adult, certainly the past decade or so, partly I think because of the trauma work that I've done on myself, I've shifted more toward the rational, cognitive side of me, and now I present more fully as an ENTP, I think, than I did before. And I don't know any different. I don't know what it's like being any of the other letters. So I'm very strong on my N for sure, and the P, and then the other two letters are pretty balanced. But I'm an extrovert. I get charged up from talking to people. I don't have a battery that wears out. The more people I talk to, the more stimulated I get. I can Zoom for, we used to do 10 or 11-hour book clubs. Like I can Zoom for hours and hours and hours and come off those Zooms high as a kite, like ready to go for 4 or 5 more hours. I don't, I go to sleep at 2 in the morning. When I have a good Zoom, I'm just up all night. So I get really charged up by interacting with people. But I also spend a lot of time alone. I like to read. I listen to a lot of music. Um, I do internet stuff, and so I have a lot of solo. I need my time to like be with myself and explore my own mind and my own self as well. But that's
Oh,
only part of the process. I can only take that so far, and then I need that contact with another human to kind of clarify it for me and expand it into somebody else's experience.
okay. Very cool. It says Mandy here, but she says Miranda's her name. She asks what all these letters stand for. Well, ENTP. I don't really like MBTI, but I'll just answer her question. It's extroverted for the E. N is intuitive. T is thinking, and P is judging. I'm sorry, perceiving. I'm an INTJ, so that's introverted, intuition, thinking, judging. But it's technically incorrect for introverts. But that's just like an MBTI letter dichotomy. Definitely what I base my channel around. Thank you for the question, though.
So we have the NT in common. And
Yeah,
I have a lot of INTJ friends that keep showing up in my life. A lot of people in the gifted group, particularly the males, turn out to be INTJs.
really.
So they're showing up a lot lately.
Okay. Yeah, so like you're autistic, but you're extroverted. I mean, it's kind of typically like autism people have like introverted, right? I know INTJs always get like typecasted as autistic. I've been called autistic so many times, and I may very well be.
I think that might be a stereotype. I know plenty of autistic people that will talk your head off. That they're very
Hmm.
social. They have that. I forgot the neurotypical like kind of slur for it, but they talk. They like I process out loud the best. Like I don't journal or write or anything like that. I talk things out, and so the more I can talk something out, especially with another person, the more I can understand whatever it is I'm trying to figure out. And so there's a lot of autistic people like that that will share information constantly with they're very social. Um, for me, if they were looking for that back when I got diagnosed, it was in the first grade in the early 70s. So I probably would have come up PDDNOS. I don't know that I'm classical autism or Asperger's, but I'm definitely on the spectrum, and it's all been rolled into ASD now, autism spectrum. They
Hmm.
say disorder. I don't consider it disorder, but so I think I would have come up with at least PDDNOS. I have my special ed report from the first grade where they did all the testing and diagnosing, and the word aloof shows up over and over and over. I'm surprised how much that in the descriptive part of the report, and I'm surprised how much that showed up as a characteristic.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's just like a stereotype thing. I played D&D with this ENTP guy, and he probably had Asperger's or something. I'm not sure. Like you said, it's all lumped together now, but he just would not stop talking. I think that was like his. I mean, he just was a mile a minute. That's why I was surprised when you said you're an ENTP, because that's kind of how ENTPs can be in general. But some are calm and some are more quiet and chilled out.
I love talkers. Like I could, when you get me and a talker together, we can go all day. James Lindsay, who I'm pretty sure is autistic, he strikes me as that. Like once he starts going off on one of his speeches or his, it's just nonstop, rapid fire conversation for hours and hours and hours and hours. He just dumps his brain out for hours.
Cool. And Cheryl says she's an ENFJ INFJ. So thank you for sharing that, Cheryl. So you said PDDNOS. I'm not familiar what that is. Can
It's
you?
pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So it's kind of a catch-all. If you didn't fit the precise bucket for Asperger's or I forget the other category of autism, then you were put in PDD NOS. And I mean, you had features of that neurodivergent category, but it wasn't the exact features of Asperger's.
Hmm.
For me, it manifests mostly in like when I'm by myself, I feel completely normal. I don't feel autistic. I rock and I stim, but outside of that, I do have dyspraxia. That's what I notice the most is the physical coordination. But it's a social phenomenon. Other people notice it, and it affects my interactions with other people and my awareness of others. I'm socially oblivious. I don't pick up on my social surrounding. Like I can't locate myself socially in the social context. I
Mm-hmm.
can't always pick up on the larger context and locate myself within that. I'm not very good at imagining how I might come across to other people, like whatever that perception is that lets you form a picture of how others might be perceiving you. And it's not that I don't pick up on nonverbal cues. I see them. Like if someone's making a face motion, I notice it. I don't know what it even means. I don't have the interpretive language to read it. And it seems different from person to person and culture to culture. So I'm much more verbal and content focused. Like as long as I can talk and dialogue with you, I can navigate socially. But if I have to rely on reading the room, reading vibes, reading social cues, I'm completely useless. I'm just at a loss. And so I bump into a lot of social walls and I'm constantly getting in social like conflict and awkward social situations and people are always kind of looking out for me and trying to babysit me because they can tell that I'm not picking up on something that everybody else is picking up on. So I get kind of infantilized and monitored and babysat a lot,
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm a grown adult. So I think people pick up on my deficiencies more than I do, and then they step in and try to compensate for them. But as long as I can rationally dialogue with somebody, that seems to bypass the need for the nonverbal caretaking.
That's pretty good. I guess that you are extroverted because you have that. A lot of people can't really do either. Like I have avoidant personality disorder. Most of my audience who's listening probably knows what that is. It has a lot of overlap with autism actually, like social ineptness. Have a hard time picking up social cues. INTJs also have FE trickster, which is extroverted feeling, which is down in their shadow, which INFJs and ENFJs have high FE, extroverted feeling. ENTPs have it too as their child function, their third function, but we have it way down there where it's like it tricks you, so we don't pick up on social cues often. We don't emit a lot of emotion. That's why we always have the quote unquote resting bitch face.
Oh,
And yeah, so it kind of acts like that's why I think we get typecast as autistic in a lot of ways. And SI demon, which is down in the shadow too. SIs and FE are like the people oriented cognitive functions. But the avoidant personality disorder is, I'm quiet. I don't really talk, even though I host a podcast. But when I'm out in the streets and stuff or at work, I don't socialize very much. And but it's more trauma related rather than autism. You said you didn't consider autism a disorder. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
No, I think it's just a natural variation, and like I'm more trait focused, so I don't get too caught up on categories like autism, ADHD, giftedness, because there can be a huge overlap between them. So I focus on specific traits. ADHD, ADHD, I associate more with cognitive processing. Autism, I associate more with social awareness and interpersonal interactions. So it's how, like, what is your particular form of neurodivergence? What are the traits of it? What's your particular profile? How does it manifest in your life? How does it impact your interactions with others or your ability to process information or intrapersonal awareness as well? So I don't think any of it's a disorder. I think there's strengths in all of it. It's situational and contextual. So what can seem like a deficit to the mainstream or the larger neurotypical culture can be a strength. And if you find the right niche where that particular trait is an asset.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very strengths based, and I like to reframe everything as strengths. I like to focus on what people can do, like whatever they're working with, whatever traits they show up to me with, how can we either turn those into strengths or take existing strengths and maximize them and find situations or context where um, you can kind of thrive using whatever characteristics you have. So
Okay.
I don't consider disorder for that reason.
Okay. Very cool. Just anybody in the audience, if they notice any like audio feedback or anything, could you let us know? I'm having some stuff in my earphones that I hear myself, but if you guys are crystal clear, then I'm good. So I have another channel called Astrotype. We're actually looking at astrology and kind of tying it in with typology. The guy I do it with is an ENTJ, and he's autistic as well. You said that there's like pros and cons to it, and you're diagnosed in the 70s, which is interesting. Do you think there's a reason for the uptick in diagnosis? Do you think it's like a lot of people argue vaccines? A lot of people argue that people are having kids older. I've seen a lot of kids with autism or something very similar where they're born substance exposed with drugs or alcohol, fetal alcohol syndrome. I even read something because my son has ADHD, and it could be like from heavy metals from baby formula. Do you have any speculation of why the increase is? And you were diagnosed quite a while ago, right?
Well, I was diagnosed as an adult, but the features were there my whole life, and
Mm-hmm.
they were identified by several people, particularly in the gifted community, but they weren't framed as autism or ADHD at the time. They didn't have that language for it. It's definitely not vaccines. I personally, like, I'm not an expert, but I personally think it's genetic. It happens natally in the womb. So baby formula or anything after birth, I don't think would be. I think it's already genetically innate. I do know the Silicon Valley phenomenon where autistic parents are having higher rates of autistic children, so there could be a genetic component to it. The latest thinking that I'm aware of identifies as many as up to 1,000 genes or genetic factors that could contribute to autism. So I think it's a whole complex of genetics and epigenetics, and any person could potentially have some combination of those genes, and that's why it's a threshold diagnosis. Like it only shows up as a diagnosis when one or more of the traits reaches a significant level of where they're more perceivable, or it starts to impact the person's functioning or becomes more noticeable to the person. So it's possible for, I'm not saying everybody's autistic, but I think the range of what qualifies as autism these days is much broader than we realize, and we're only getting the cases that meet the specific threshold for a diagnosis. And as to why the rates are going up, I think probably genetics. If it is genetic and more autistic people are having children, but then identification, like where it's like I they would have it missed even me in my day, and now I think they would have caught me because our diagnostic instruments and diagnostic criteria have gotten better at identifying autism, and we're looking for it more. It's on our radar now.
Yeah, it's just like social awareness and, just less ignorance of it now too, right? You think?
Yeah, there's less ignorance of that it exists and a condition, but I'm still not like I self accommodate as much as I can. I don't rely on neurotypicals to get me and figure out what they have to do to accommodate and adjust me because no matter how I don't even tell people I'm autistic much anymore because no matter how many times I give people that information, it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know what that means in my specific
Mm-hmm.
case. So I've just stopped pushing the autism and trying to identify myself as autistic. And I mean, I tell people if it comes up or if they want to know about it. But I used to think I was giving them useful information that they could use to kind of adjust to my weirdness or my differences. But it doesn't do that for them. It's just a piece of information that doesn't really mean anything to them. So they are aware that there's a thing called autism, but that I think that's as far as the awareness goes. And I don't know how to accommodate neurotypicals either. I've spent my whole life trying to do it. So it's, theory of mind and the double empathy problem. So I'm not any better at figuring out how to optimize my interactions with neurotypicals than they are with me. So just knowing that there is this thing called neurotypicality and neuroatypicality doesn't have much practical value, I find. We still struggle to like successfully interact with each other. And as far as the astrology, when I was 19 or 20, I just left college and I was going to become a professional astrologer. And I
Oh
was
yeah.
taking a correspondence course through the AFA. That's back before they had the internet. So you had to use the ephemeris and table of houses and do all the charts by hand. And
Mm.
I studied it. As I studied it more and more, I became more and more like convinced that that there wasn't as much to it as I thought there were. And then I decided to stop pursuing it after that. But I had a strong interest in astrology at one point.
Really? We're actually finding a lot of correlation with people's type and astrology. We're seeing like patterns and stuff. It's kind of interesting, and we're actually been looking at a lot of autistic people. I know you said you prefer the term neurodivergent, right? Kind of like a lumps
That's
of.
what I use. It's just an umbrella term that
Yeah.
all it means is someone is not neurotypical or they have some differentiation or variation from the norm. And then I can focus on what that individual variation is in the person. And so it's just an umbrella category that gives me a broad it's a broad enough term to just sketch out a rough
Hmm.
picture and then I can home in on the individual details without needing a label like autism or ADHD or something like that.
So, what other besides giftedness, autism, ADHD? What else falls under the neurodivergent spectrum?
Well, there are some mental illnesses that people try to classify under that, particularly the more organic ones like bipolar would probably be one of them, schizophrenia. I have PTSD, which is acquired, but it's a form of brain damage, and my brain is definitely different than it was before the PTSD. So if you're counting neurodivergence as just brain differences or variation in brain structure, then people can make a case for stuff like PTSD. I know in the 2E gifted community, there's a debate about whether PTSD qualifies as a second exceptionality or not. Because to be 2E, you have to have giftedness, which is one exceptionality, and something like autism or ADHD, some kind of neurodivergent that intersects with the giftedness. And does PTSD qualify as that second E if you don't have any of the others? And I mean, there's no clear cut answer to it. You can make a case either way.
Okay. Hi, Elodie. There's the INTJ I was
Oh yeah,
telling you
hey,
about.
Lodi.
Hope I'm saying your name right. Thank you for
Oh yeah.
joining us. So, what does giftedness mean exactly? Can you give us a better definition? Is it just like a genius, or what does that mean?
No, I don't consider myself a genius. I learn really well. It's usually done by IQ testing, and so there's an IQ component. Basically, I'm an accelerated learner. Like I learn very quickly. I was by the time I hit first grade, I was reading. I've never not known a time when I could read. I've grown up. I don't remember ever learning to read. I've just always known how to do it. So when I showed up in kindergarten and first grade, I was way accelerated. in my reading. Even in the reading group, I was in the highest reading group, and even then, it was too slow for me. So I was easy to identify and refer to testing because of that. But I don't need a lot of repetitions. Like I can pick up things very quickly. Once I learn something, I can move on to the next thing. I don't need to keep reviewing it. I learn best when there's a lot of content coming at me really fast and there's a high level of challenge. If people present the information too slowly or like bit by bit, then my brain's going to lose interest. So I think it's a capacity for learning at an accelerated pace and possibly in a certain way. There's a depth and complexity to it. Like I have hyper curiosity about everything, and I like to go as deep into a topic that I'm interested in as I can. So it's stuff like that. And then there's a guy named Kashmir Dabrowski that did a lot of work on positive disintegration and what's called excitabilities. And he identified six of them, or five of them: intellectual, emotional, imaginational, sensory, and psychomotor. And so people are starting to tie in these excitabilities with giftedness as well. And I'm very emotionally excitable. When my emotions hit, I call them Beethoven emotions. They hit very strong and they hit like at a 10 every time. So if I'm experiencing joy, it's immense, intense joy. If I'm experiencing sorrow, it's immense, intense sorrow, etc. Um, Intellectually, I have that hyper curiosity. My mind, it never goes off. Like I never stop thinking. I have no idea what it feels like to not think or to not be curious about something or thinking about something. And I usually have five or six things going on in my head at one time. And imaginational, like that's really kind of part of the N in the ENTP. Concrete details are only meaningful to me as part of this larger, vast network of pictures and imagery and future possibilities and past experiences. So I have this wide imaginational range. So any stimulus that hits my brain is going to generate these complex imaginational images and excite my imagination to create these pictures. And then the psychomotor is the stim. Like I rock constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I grew up rocking, and that's always been something that people noticed about me that got associated with me. And the sensory, a lot of it is that's where you get the like sensitivity to sound and light and smells. And I don't so much have that. I do have a sensitivity to like an aesthetic sensitivity to art or music or a painting, or like if I go into an art museum, I can only stay a certain amount of time and I get overwhelmed from that art affects me so intensely and moves me so deeply that I have to leave the museum after a while. It's like being exposed to just volts of electricity. And so I have all of those excitabilities, and that's tied in. That's I'd say the past several decades at least. It's also tied in. It's being tied into giftedness as one of the features of giftedness.
Interesting. I'm really curious how you could just kind of know how to read. I
Me
remember,
too. My
yeah.
mom read to us as a child. We had like the little golden books and stuff, and I think she
Hmm.
would sit and read the words and look at the pictures with us. And somehow I just pick like I'm good at picking up patterns, so I picked up the patterns of the words and the grammatical structure and the syntax. And but I don't ever remember like this is an A, this is a B, this is the word bird. I don't like I my memory starts at a level beyond the rudiments of reading. I don't remember picking those up at all. And by
I
the time
remember.
I got to Head Start in kindergarten, I was reading, and we were coloring our worksheets. Like we had colored the letter A one day and the letter B one day, and already knew how to read complete books.
Yeah, that's a very interesting too. I really appreciate that big picture you painted of us. I never heard of anybody getting overwhelmed by art either. There's a term for people who say they can see or like taste color or hear colors or something like that. Is that something that you have?
Synesthesia. Yeah, I
Okay.
have I have friends with synesthesia. I know musicians that see the notes as color, and I don't have synesthesia. Although when I did psychedelics, I did. Like it can show up in the psychedelic experience as well. I do. It's not so much synesthesia, but my processing is when a stimulus hits. Like say I'm reading a really good book that's engaging me. It will hit my brain as text, but then it'll become auditory. The words will become auditory and visual, the pictures. So it's kind of this composite aesthetic experience, but it's not necessarily the five senses that are being melded together, or some of the five senses being melded. It's more like an imagination or conceptual analog to synesthesia, I guess.
Okay, that's interesting. I know a lot of people like they'll put you on antipsychotics quick at the psych hospital I worked at if you could have told them that.
Or really?
Yeah, yeah. It just there's a lot of misunderstanding with people and different thought patterns and stuff. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
I
if
talk
that's
about
happening, I'd say that's true. That if they're mistaking that for a mental, there we actually, a May is Mental Health book month, and as part of the 2E group I'm part of, the gifted group, we're going to be showing a movie a week, and one of them's going to be on neurodivergence, but how it's mistaken for mental illness, and because a lot of extreme autism or extreme neurodivergent, if it's too different from the norm, under the inexperienced eye, can present as mental illness, and sometimes it's attempted to be treated as mental illness. And I think that's in all cases very bad for and damaging for the person.
okay, Miranda, Mandy. I think you want to be called Miranda. Wait, you're saying people don't put words in imaginary visuals? I think that's kind of the dichotomy between intuitive and sensors. In the MBTI, the sensors, which make up the majority of people, which are probably you could call neurotypicals, basically, in a broad sense. I don't think they really do that, but I know I do.
They just experience the concrete stimulus or data as it is,
Yeah, they
without
need
any
something.
extra added brain noise or processing to it.
Had a lot of conversations with people, and a lot of people think I'm crazy because I just can't sit there and talk about the football and weather all day. You know.
No, I was gonna say how normal you seem to me. Like, you talked about being avoidant and not very talkative or people person. I'm like, you seem fine to me.
Well,
Like, if I saw you out in public, like on the bus or something, we could carry on a conversation just
no,
fine.
it would be different out in the real world. I mean, I
Oh,
think this is like a safer place for me. You know. Are you familiar with avoidant personality disorder? That's I wanted
oh
to change
yeah, I
gears.
had a good friend that was avoidant, and my ex was avoidant, and we don't really. I'm from the South Louisiana, so we don't really have a lot of introverts or avoidant people down there. Or if we do, they stay home and you never see them. But up here, they're the majority of the population. So I had my first taste of avoidance and introversion when I moved up here, and it was very difficult for me, particularly when conflict happened, because I'm the type, when conflict starts, I like to work it out and get through it and move to the other side of it. And with avoidant people, it's very difficult to get them to work through conflict or have conversations about anything that they feel like is confrontational or combative. So it
Mm-hmm.
was my avoidant ex and my avoidant friend. It was a big struggle.
Okay. You might be thinking of avoidant attachment style. That's a little bit different from the personality disorder. I won't get too much into that. I have videos on my channel if people want to watch it for sure. But you did mention you have PTSD, and I really like getting into trauma and people's background. I think it's important for people to share, even though there's a stigma that surrounds it and a lot of people aren't comfortable sharing it. It happens to a lot more people than people think, and I think we need to talk about it and kind of end it. It's kind of a cyclical nature, and it needs to kind of be reduced as much as possible. Can you do you mind sharing any of your experiences?
No, not at all. I had childhood trauma growing up, but not major trauma, just like social, like normal teenage childhood adversity. I was a misfit in my family and got bullied a little bit at school and that type of stuff. But my real trauma started, the kind that actually altered my brain, was I was living in Vegas with my partner. He was the love of my life, the closest person I've been to ever, the closest human being I've ever been to.
Mm-hmm.
And he passed away in 2007, and I watched it happen in the ICU. I was there for the final night. He was on a ventilator, and it shattered my mind. It shattered my soul. It completely. I was never the same person since, and they call it acute stress reaction. My whole system kind of shut down as a result of this experience, and It felt like weeks. I'm sure it was several days, possibly a week, to even come back to reality and start being able to even function again. I wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping. And ever since that moment, the PTSD affects the amygdala, which is
Mm-hmm.
memories, the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is memory. The amygdala is the like alarm system. So I was more hyperreactive and
Mm-hmm.
sensitive to every little thing. And the prefrontal ventromedial cortex, which kind of helps to regulate all of that. So all of that was changed. It used to take a lot to get me angry, like maybe once or twice a year. Somebody could really push my buttons, get me worked up, and it was happening like 5 or 6 times a week, like every day. Just something was triggering my frustration and anger. So my sensitivity, that threat sensitivity meter, was very very sensitive. And
Yeah.
um, what else was I going to say about it? See, I lost it. It's going to have to come back. Oh, and then a couple of years after that, I met a guy here in Seattle, which is why I ended up moving up here, to start a new relationship. And he was autistic and neurodivergent and gifted, and so I thought that, perfect match. He's the closest person to me that I've ever met. So we were so much alike, and it was very abusive. It was a very negative experience, and I was only with him for a couple of months, but I lived with him in his home. And when I got out of that, I was so shell shocked from that
Mm-hmm.
experience that was like relationship trauma and abuse. And so that compounded on top of the grief, the PTSD from the grief. And that started like a whole new form or cycle of trauma that I had to recover from. And then a lot of what I thought were features of him as a unique individual, I thought, well, he's just a really off, bizarre person. But a lot of it was cultural, because there were cultural features in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest that repeated that trauma that I had with him, that I struggled with as well, especially socially. The social culture and expectations here are very different than what I'm used to. And so I was in Seattle for like 12 or 13 years, and it was a constant hostile environment. Like every day I left my house, I'd prepare to get in a fight with somebody. Am I going to fight with the Starbucks barista? Am I going to fight with the bus driver? Am I going to fight with my coworkers? Because if you don't present a very specific way or walk a very particular line, particularly if you're male, particularly if you're tall, um, people react differently and you get treated differently. And so a conflict could spark, would be a combination of my PTSD and their kind of hypervigilance towards people, males, people from the South, people that they perceive as threatening, which I
Mm-hmm.
had all the characteristics they found threatening. I was in a mental health group once, a meeting, a committee I was on, and one lady in the group said that because I talk with my hands, that's an indication of violence, and it means I'm violent. And I said,
What?
no, it's not. I'm gay and I'm from the South, and we talk with our hands. And she said, no, it means you're violent. Like she tried to, and so as a result of that, that day they all took a vote and voted me out of the group because
What?
this he thought I was violent, stuff like that. So it was constant, like swimming upstream. I never was able to integrate socially at all. It was obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and I was trying to recover from both traumas at the same time. So at some point, that's when I got into therapy and became a peer counselor. And so through my peer work, I was able to find a niche for myself in the mental health world. And I also helped to start the local autism community. So for a while, I had a lot of my mental health work converged on mental health work specifically for the neurodivergent population. That seemed to be the niche that I worked best in and that my strengths were suited for. And so through all of that work and the personal techniques I developed for myself, I've been able to manage the trauma a lot better than say 10 years ago. So now my reactions, where normally they would last days, sometimes weeks, I could get them down to an hour, sometimes 5 minutes, depending on the trigger. I can get that window very narrow and recover from it a lot more quickly.
Thank you for sharing that. Sorry to hear about your past lover. I've watched several people die, including my grandma. and my grandpa, and that was very hard for me. Uh, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, definitely check out Gen X Jeff's channel. Subscribe to that. Also have a video coming out where I talk a lot about some of my trauma
Oh,
and my avoidant personality disorder and EMDR therapy, which has been somewhat beneficial for me. So go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss that. I'd really appreciate that.
I've heard that EMDR helps. I have a question about your avoidant personality. You said disorder. Do you consider disorder, or is it just a type?
I think it's disorder. It's greatly debilitated my life and hindered me. I mean, it started when about puberty, probably about 10, 11, 12, I'd say for me, and I couldn't even make eye contact with anybody. Kind of like, that's a big trait for autism, right? Eye contact. But it didn't start till I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I just had a severe trauma growing up and
Mm.
neglect and all that. So I don't want to talk too much about me. I want to make this more about you. But yeah, it's definitely I wasn't something I was born with. I have maybe a genetic disposition with it. Even my astrology chart says I have hints of this in my life, and maybe that's the way I'm supposed to be born. Whatever your belief may be.
But if it
But
was traumagenic, that could explain why it's not a natural type, but a
yeah,
disorder.
that's kind of the whole purpose of this channel. I want to talk to people about their traumas and why some people who are traumatized become schizophrenic, why some people have borderline personality disorder. Working in a psych hospital, I noticed like certain types are more prone to getting certain mental illnesses and personality disorders and things like that. So I just kind of want to correlate all that data and get
Certain
that.
MBTI types.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
that's interesting.
Yeah,
I
it seems
spent
like
a
in.
year working in patient psych too.
Yeah, how's that?
It was good. I loved it. It was one of my best jobs ever. Adolescent psych.
Oh yeah, I worked at a level one adolescence unit and it get pretty rough. A
Yeah.
lot of sad moments too. All right. So, what have been some effective treatments? You said you've been to therapy for your PTSD. What have you done for like ADHD? Has ADHD sounds like kind of benefited you really? I
Yeah,
mean, mine's
I have almost none of the downside. I have all of the strengths and none of the downsides. I'm able to focus when I need to. I can focus on. I am at my best when I'm doing 5 or 6 things at once, and that's where my brain is most comfortable. It's like switching really quickly between different projects. If I have to just try to focus on one task at a time, I'm not as effective at it. So the ADHD for me is has been nothing but a benefit. I have hyperactivity, but that only bothers other people. It doesn't bother me at all. And it actually helps my focus, and it helps me focus on multiple things at once. And I don't get I can pull my focus back very easily if I'm distracted. So I don't do anything for the ADHD. I just it's more of an asset than anything else. The autism that's really for other people to accommodate, because again, it doesn't affect me when I'm by myself. It's a social thing. I I use conversation and dialogue to navigate it as best I can. And that's why it really helps to be surrounded by gifted people, because they have the intellectual capacity to talk through these things and the perception to understand the nuances and notice the difference. And I think it takes something like that. Like with a neurotypical, like just a person on the street, I may not be able to have the conversations I need to navigate of any of the difficulties from the autism. I do carry a little card in my wallet that explains that I have autism and PTSD. Like when I go to doctor's appointments or out in public and the misunderstandings or the communication breakdowns happen, I can show them the card, but sometimes they don't even read it, or they
Mhm.
don't know, even if they read it, they don't know what they're supposed to do with the information. So I still have, I rely on my own skills usually to get me out of difficulties caused by the autism, whether it's trying to educate the person and talk my way through it, or maybe go around them and find another person that can help, that has a better understanding of the situation. So I'm a lot of self advocacy. I'm constantly going over people's heads. Well, I'll give the person 1 or 2 tries to try to resolve it. If that doesn't work, I'll bring in a supervisor, or I'll bring in a manager, a third party that can maybe help. And then if that doesn't work, we'll go to the next level. I used to be a mental health ombuds, so I know how to take like problems and issues up the chain until they get resolved.
Chain of command, yeah.
Yeah. And then the PTSD, I did go to therapy, but it was like just basic, the public health therapy system, and it was more of a band-aid. It didn't really help recover from the PTSD. It just helped to kind of manage some of the symptoms, or get a put some of the symptoms on hold enough to where I could start functioning. But I didn't really start getting quality therapy till I found a gifted therapist that specialized in 2E. He worked with autistic and gifted children and adults, and he was gifted himself. So that's when I really got the therapy I needed, and that was only for about a year, and then COVID hit. I do mostly what's called autopsychotherapy, which is another concept from Dabrowski, the theorist I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And just through experience, just through being aware, like awareness of my reactions, and using different cognitive and intrapersonal techniques, I've just kind of taught myself over the years what I need to do to manage those reactions. Another thing that helps, though, particularly in a PTSD reaction, is cold water, ice cold water on the forehead. I have a cold rag because the reaction activates that sympathetic nervous system, and sometimes the cold water will shock it back down to the parasympathetic and reset it so that the parasympathetic engages, which is the more calming, grounding part of your nervous system. So if I can get that sympathetic reaction under control in enough time, it buys me a pause or a space to start using my cognitive techniques. Because when you're in the grips of a reaction, even though I know intellectually what to do, cognitively, I'm not always able to access those techniques in that moment or put them into practice. So I use cold water a lot to buy me the time to do that. And then another thing that really helps, and I'm big on, is community support, like creating healthy communities, healthy groups that support each other. I have a little network of peers I can turn to when I need to talk or if I'm having a particularly difficult day, and it helps me to process with other people. So usually if I reach out to somebody and process it a little bit, that can help me get back to baseline and get back on a good track. So I use a lot of the support network that I've built in these communities that I'm helping to build.
Very cool. So I have a trouble like making communities and stuff like that. This one thing that really stressed me out about making a YouTube channel is a lot of people like messaging me, asking me for like advice and help and stuff like that. I'm deeply introverted, and it kind of even burns me out socially. But don't let that stop you from messaging me, of course, out there. And I haven't really heard people talk about. Kim brushed on a little bit in the last interview about good points of ADHD. My son has ADHD, and I think it's very typical. Like I said, certain mental illnesses, disorders, whatever you want to call them, or certain types like ENTPs, ENFPs, ESFPs, and ESFJs. That's Linda Barron's interaction style, which is kind of a deeper aspect of typology. Um, they're the get things going type. They're kind of the hyperactive, bouncing off the walls types and or types. My son is struggling very bad in school right now. He's been doing a little bit better last week or two. What I mean, he scored like 84 in his IQ test. He's probably going to be ESFP, ESTP, so sensor, not the intuitive type. So, what advice can you give to someone who's struggling with it?
How old is he? What grade is he?
He's 6 years old and in the first grade.
Well, it's still early. I would look for strengths, like if he is more the sensor type, find what his particular interest or hyper focus is, and start like building it up as a strength, and kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm really big on niche building and finding it's the square peg and the round hole thing, and it's easier to find the hole that you do fit in than try to force yourself into some socially constructed hole that doesn't match who you naturally are. So if you notice he's good with particular types of environments or things or people, try to put him more in the environments where he has an opportunity to develop that characteristic as a strength. I try to normalize behaviors as much as possible and destigmatize. So if he does have any what they call deficits, they're natural to him. I'm strengths based, so find what he is good at, what he does well, and just build on those and develop the deficits as much as you can. But don't, I mean, manage your expectations around it. And I wouldn't push too hard on the parts where, like, it's a spiky profile probably. So the parts where he's not, like more of the valleys that he has, I wouldn't push too hard on those. Just
Hmm.
get to the minimum he needs to function and get by, and really hit the strengths harder, and like help him develop the parts of him that he is good at, and find the environments where he could actualize those parts of himself. And the key, especially since he's a first grade education, is finding a teacher or school system that understands him, that you can ally with. And a lot of the times, because the school systems don't always know what to do or get it right, so a lot of times it involves a lot of advocacy on your part, finding the teachers and staff at the school that you can ally with, that do get it and are on your side, and using them as kind of an advocacy network, and possibly bringing in other organizations if you need to, and hooking up with other parent organizations maybe, or if there's a group of students, parents at your school that have similar kids that are struggling, form a little coalition or support group with them.
Yeah, I have him in art therapy. I have him in a lot of behavioral health services right now. He really gravitates toward art. He's showing interest in piano. I just don't think I could afford that or have time right now. I do like 6, 7 hours of services for him a week, so it's kind of a lot. He's interested in learning judo again because I want to get back into judo myself. I used to do it, and I think that'd be good for his focus and stuff.
Yeah, all of that. And maybe there's even like an online piano keyboard program he could at least start playing around with and learning the notes.
Yeah, he watches YouTube videos like people playing piano to songs and
Oh,
little
I'm already
tutorials.
encouraged. I'm very optimistic. If he has all those interests already at first grade, I'm very optimistic.
Thought about getting him like a keyboard. His birthday's coming up. Maybe I will.
I had a little toy piano growing up that I was able to plink stuff out on.
Yeah, I had like my mom had a really old like organ thing. It was kind of interesting, like a electric organ. It was kind of weird,
Oh,
but all right. I think I want to bring this thing home. Do you have any book recommendations? I usually suggest at least three. It doesn't have to be typology related, psychology related. It could be whatever.
um, yeah, it was really hard to narrow down to three. I have a whole pile right here. I'll try to give three. And these are my background. My passion is literature, the humanities, intellectual history. So these are mostly literature books, but they really impacted my life on a very personal level. The first one is Northrop Frye, Fearful Symmetry. He's a Canadian literary critic. Jordan Peterson draws a lot from his work. He works with archetypes and myths. And this book, particularly the first 5 chapters, it's a study of the poetry of William Blake, but the first 5 chapters are more general and introductory. And what it does is the first chapter makes a shift from kind of normal, ordinary, rational thinking, what in typology would probably be called S thinking, into more imaginative, and it centers, instead of rationality at the center of thinking, it centers the imagination at the center of thinking. And then it goes through the next 4 chapters, goes through religion, art, literature, and ethics, using the new framework that. And it really, like, reading that book created a mental shift in my head where I could never see the world differently after reading those first 5 chapters. This is one I talk about a lot. It's called The Mirror and the Lamp by M.H. Abrams, and it talks about the shift after the Enlightenment from mechanistic worldview to Romanticism, which was more of an organic worldview. And we see the tensions between mechanism and organicism playing out in our society right now. So it's kind of the missing link between the Enlightenment and everything that came after it, including our modern world. And the mirror is the example of art as a representation of nature, or a mirror reflecting nature. And the lamp is art as expressing the inner soul of the artist. You're taking something within and expressing it externally, which is a very modern form of art compared to most of human history. And it happened around the 18th, 19th century. And then this is probably one of my favorite books ever. It seems like the nerdiest book in the world, and in a way it is. It's called European Literature and the Latin Middle Ages. And what it does is it traces the development of our literary tradition and intellectual tradition from the Greek and Romans all the way to Dante and the Renaissance, using the Latin literature that intervened in the Dark and Middle Ages. It sounds super nerdy and esoteric, but it is the most fascinating, edge of your seat book I have ever read. The journey that he takes you on, it's almost like an adventure novel. And the structure of the book is It's not a linear structure. It's kind of like this spiral that each chapter you read takes you deeper and deeper up the mountain, and then you look back at the end over everything that he surveyed. If you like intellectual history or literature or philosophy, it is quite a journey worth taking. I've read it 5, 6, 7 times by now, and so those are my three main recommendations. There's one more I want to throw in. This has really helped me. It's The Classical Tradition by Gilbert Highet, and it shows the presentness of the past. It like things that are happening in Greek and Rome 2,000 years ago and Christianity throughout the ages are we're still talking about now. They're still playing out in our society right now. And the things that we think are modern cultural, political, and cultural conflicts, people were having the same conflicts and conversations 2,000 years ago. And that book traces the kind of the developmental lineage of all of that to our present day through art and literature.
Hmm.
So those would be my recommendations.
Very cool. If you want to send me the names and titles of those and the authors in Discord, I'm trying to get in the habit of putting them in the description. Doesn't have to be right now. Anybody in the audience has any other questions, I feel free to encourage any questions. I appreciate them. Last few questions I have. What would you like others to know about you, ENTPs, neurodivergence? Is there anything you'd like to get out in public?
That I believe the differences and barriers are, and I could be wrong about this. I think they're more superficial than they appear, and I'm basically a normal-ish person, and we probably have more in common with each other, and there's more potential to develop bridges that unite us than have this be a thing that separates us. As weird as I can be on the surface, I think over the long term, me and people like me, we can form social connections and integrate into society and contribute positively to society. So if you can look past the kind of superficial neurological differences, I think there is potential for deeper connection with the rest of humanity.
Okay, very cool. I'll try to answer this best I can. I don't know. I don't consider myself neurotypical. Do you have any other questions you'd like to know about INTJs, neurotypicals, just anybody in general?
Well, because a lot of INTJs are showing up in my life lately, what's a good INTJ 101 care and feeding of to know as I start to interact with them more?
We can be very paranoid.
Oh,
So be very clear and concise in communication with us, especially if they have like a lot of history of trauma. I think pretty much any like autism or neurodivergence or anybody who's kind of more on the rare side, they're probably had like a kind of rougher upbringing because they're different.
mm,
I think our downsides, our personality flaws are a little more, what's the word, demonized because it's not as common, if you know what I mean.
what would a personality flaw be?
We're kind of seen as mean, cruel, I guess. Not very caring, unempathetic. We get the psychopath
Oh, okay,
stereotype a lot too.
okay.
Uh, yeah, but I guess I really enjoyed the conversation that we had. I think you're a very smart, deep person and very interested in what you have to say. One of my favorite podcasts I think I've done so far.
Oh,
Do you have anything you'd like to say before we go?
uh, I think I cover a lot. If you're a gifted or 2E, come and check us out. If you're a man that wants mental health support, or just to connect with other men, we're not a gushy like talk about your feelings group. We make it very easy and comfortable to open up, and there's no obligation to open up. If you just want to come and hang out with other men, you're welcome to do that too. So contact me for either of those two servers, and I'll send you an invitation. And we have our men's mental health Zoom on Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. So you're welcome to that too.
Yeah, I actually was going. I went a few times, maybe about a half dozen times, an in-person men's mental health group thing. It was actually pretty good. It was a little intense for me because there was like anywhere from 10 to 30 people. So,
Oh,
but it helped me share in front of a group a little bit, and it's definitely it's nice to know you're not alone.
I would have something to say to you as well. I would say don't give up on your your avoidant. I know it was trauma based, but if you there is value in connecting with other people. So if you, I would say don't give up on that. Like continue. There are ways to successfully make the connections that you need for support and just general mental health well being.
Yeah, I think I've been doing a little bit better as of recent. I've connected with a woman. Hopefully, it kind of works out. An ENFP, so hopefully that works out. But I don't know. I don't have very good experience with relationships, but I don't want to give up.
And patience with yourself and a lot of self compassion too. Like don't
Yeah,
be too hard on yourself.
I can't let my son down, so I got to keep going.
Oh,
But anyways, thank you all for joining us, Miranda, Cheryl, Elodie. I appreciate the dialogue and the text.
thank
Uh,
everyone.
Check out Gen X Jeff, Twitter, his email, his Discord servers that should be down below, minus the email. Subscribe to his channel. Subscribe to mine as well. Like this video, share it. I'd really appreciate it if you know somebody that's in Jeff's shoes or Jeff's shoes. All right, everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. Take care.